Okay, we're up.
All right. Thank you for joining us today for our Dallas Public Library Grow With Us program. Sorry for the delay. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we're glad you joined us today. Today we have an introduction to bulbs, and we have Stan Atten with us today. He's from the Rainbow Garden Club of North Texas, and he's going to share some photos and some information about planting bulbs and things like that. Stan is, like I said, he's part of the Rainbow Garden Club of North Texas, and he has an urban garden where he grows a variety of flowers, shrubs, tomatoes, and he likes to tour public gardens. So he's got a wide variety of background. He's presented with the Dallas County Master Gardeners, and so he's got a lot of information to share with us. Want to let you know our Grow With Us program, our series of online sessions with the Dallas Public Library Seed Library and the Dallas Environmental Quality and Sustainability programs. And these are presented every Monday at 12 o'clock. So you can check out our website for more of our programs that are coming up. And without further ado, I guess we'll turn it over to Stan. Thank you, Stan.
Well, thank you. Today we're going to be talking about plants that you can be planting in the ground right now. October, November, December. Some of them are bulbs, some of them are corms, some of them are shrubs. But the goal is to add color to your garden in the winter time. And some of these will carry on to the spring. Now, when I first started gardening 35 years ago, I didn't know much about gardening at all. So it's sort of been, I've learned as I've gone along. And one of the things I learned quickly was that if I wanted to add something quickly to a garden that wouldn't take a lot of time, wouldn't require a lot of care, bulbs were one of my answers to my solution. And so what I have done over 35 years is transform my garden so that I have something blooming pretty much every month of the year. And a lot of those are bulbs. And when you go to a garden center and see bulbs, they don't look that pretty, but they contain a wonderful, amazing color inside them that they're just waiting to come outside and show off in your garden. So when you're thinking about plants, we're thinking bulbs and shrubs. You're planting them late in the fall. Once it cools off, once it's no longer summer in North Texas. Now, many of these bulbs do real well here in North Texas because originally they came from the highlands of Turkey or South Africa, where it's dry in the summertime and it rains in the winter and it gets cold. Of course, with our climate change, conditions are changing. And so some of the things that I was able to do 30 years ago, I can't do anymore. But other plants now survive and thrive here in North Texas. So I'm going to start with shrubs, bulbs, and then I'm going to go to other plants. Now, many of these plants that you're planting, you want to first make sure that wherever you're locating your bulbs, that the ground isn't soggy. The soil needs to drain well, and you want to have lots of sunshine during the winter months. So you want your trees to lose their leaves from November, December, and January so that the bulbs can get that sunshine they need. So we're going to start off with shrubs. So we're talking plants like Carolina jasmine, Chinese fringe flower, camellia, mahonia, and rosemary. The Carolina jasmine, it's an early bloomer. It's usually late January, early February, but it's dependent on the winter. If it's a warm winter, they may bloom earlier. If it's a cold winter like we had this year, it may be later. Chinese fringe flower, now this is a plant that I first saw at the Dallas Arboretum a number of times, and I said, you know, I've got to get one of those plants. And so I did a few years ago. I actually had two of them. They didn't make it through URI, that week of very cold weather we had this year in February. But I have several that have popped up in my yard in this area as volunteers. So they came from back from the seeds. And so now I've got 3 little ones coming up. And when they were in my garden blooming, they would bloom March, sometimes in June, and sometimes in September. But the biggest bloom is always in March. Camellias. Now these Camellia japonicas, they originally are from Japan, and they'll bloom usually December and January. So these are plants that you should already have in the ground or be putting them in pretty quickly. But they have beautiful flowers and very fragrant. Mahonia. Now I have one of these in my yard, and gets morning sun, but afternoon shade, and it blooms about the middle of February. And this year it was getting ready to bloom when Uri froze it. So the plant survived, but I did not get to see the flowers. Rosemary. I had this rosemary plant in my yard for a number of years. And then about 8 to 10 years after I'd planted it, it started blooming in the winter. And it was covered in these beautiful blue flowers. And on a sunny day, it was covered in bees. Because of course they're looking for something to eat in the wintertime. And this was a perfect place for them to stop. But this is an upright rosemary. There are trailing rosemaries as well, but they bloom in the summertime. Unfortunately, this plant died partly during a big snowstorm about 10 years ago. And then another portion of it died after Uri. So I'm having to find a replacement for this plant. But it took a long time for it to bloom the first time, a number of years. So now we're going to talk about bulbs. We've talked about shrubs. Now bulbs are usually very small, amazing little things that are filled with color. Their plant is inside, their flower is all inside for the first year. And here in North Texas, size does matter. If you're talking about something that's blooming in the wintertime, usually you want a smaller bulb because our winters are not always cold enough for bulbs if they're much larger. They still need well-drained soil so they don't rot, and they need sunlight and they need neglect. You don't want to really mess with them. After they bloom and their leaves turn yellow, then you can cut off the foliage. Do not do like Martha Stewart does and twist your leaves together, because that hinders their ability to store energy for next year. And really what they're doing after they bloom and they're green, they're storing up energy so that you'll have a nice bulb next year. So we're going to talk about them in the order of when they bloom. So we're talking about crocus, narcissus, daffodils, grape hyacinths, snowdrops, Siberian squill, giant hyacinths, amaryllis, ranunculus, Dutch iris, species tulips, Spanish hyacinths, and crinum. Now, crocus, they're very temperature dependent. So if we have a really mild and warm winter, they'll bloom in early January. And if we have a really cold winter like we had this year, they'll wait and they'll bloom later. So they'll bloom in February. But normally, most of the time, they'll bloom sometime in January. And what you'll see is first is a little sprigs of green, white striped green, and then you'll see a flower, and the flower will open up during the day, and they're about the size maybe of your pinky. They're not very big, but they're very colorful. And like any other flower blooming this time of year, they're going to be in a place for any insects that are looking for nectar. So bees and stuff would be out looking for them. Here's a closer up view, and you can see the leaves next to that white bloom. As you can see, this is mixed in a bed that's got lots of leaves and mulch, but they will grow up through that mulch and they will bloom. And here's another one. I love taking pictures of crocus because they're so pretty. At that time of year, there's very little else that's blooming. Narcissus. Now this grows at the back of my alley, and they bloom December, January, February, depending on the winter again. If the soil is cold enough, they say it's time to bloom. And if you do cut them and bring them into your house for a vase, they're very strong. You will know that you have narcissus in your house. Daffodils. These are one of my favorite flowers that are bulbs. There are thousands of varieties of daffodils. They all are classified in 13 classes. And if they have a name, they're registered with the Royal Horticultural Society in England. This is just a bright, beautiful yellow one. This is an ice folly with the yellow in the center and the white petals. Ice follies date back to before 1953. So they're an older daffodil. And they just pop up everywhere and they multiply. Again, more daffodils. You notice it's a different type because the petals are sort of flared back. This one is a pink center and a white petals. A snowboard, this one's all white. And again, more daffodils. This one is orange and a little bit of red and white. As you can see, I've got little tags to tell me what these bulbs are, because if they bloom at the right time, I want to enter them in the daffodil show they have in March. And then this is Julia Jane. This one reliably blooms in early February. It's about the size of my thumb. It's green on the interior, and then there's a little yellow stamen to it, and then it's white on the outside. They're very tiny. They're called bulcodiums, and there's a whole group of daffodils that are this size. And it lasts, depending if it's a warm winter, it may only last a couple of days, but it's always a pretty thing to see in early February. And this is a place, if you've never seen a mass of daffodils in bloom, Mrs. Lee's Daffodil Garden in Gladewater, Texas is a must-see. Now, the only conditions with this are it is on a ranch. If it's wet, you can't go there because it's mostly dirt roads. And it covers about 900 acres. And the story behind this garden is, back in 1948 or so, Mrs. Lee ordered a box of daffodils. Well, she got a railroad car of daffodils. So her and her employees at the ranch planted daffodils all through her ranch. So these hills are covered with thousands, tens of thousands of daffodils. And then you need to call ahead if you're going to go to see if the road conditions are okay on the ranch. And also if the daffodils are in bloom, because again, they depend on the weather. If it's a cold winter, they may not bloom as quickly as they would otherwise. So, but sometime in February and March, this is a place to check out. Now, if you want more information on daffodils, there is a Texas Daffodil Society. They have a show the second weekend in March at the Rosine Hall at the Dallas Arboretum. It's open to the public. Their show for 2022 will be March 11th and 12th. And I'm going to show you a few photos. This was from the March 2020 flower show. And this was the American Daffodil Society National Convention was held here in Dallas. It was just before COVID hit and the city shut down. So as you can see, daffodils come in many sizes and colors. These are flowers that were entered into the flower show. And each card represents a different plant, maybe a different grower. And these are all the different classes that they have them set up. So now we're going to talk about something else that you plant in the fall and comes up in the spring. So we're talking about grape hyacinths. They look like little miniature grapes. We're going to have some rain this week, and probably next week I'll start seeing this greenery pop up in my garden because they always come up early. The greenery does. The actual plant won't bloom until February. And each of those little pieces of that flower, the bees will touch them to get their nectar. And when they're done, those all become seeds that scatter. So if you plant a group of these bulbs, they will spread and multiply every year. Snowdrops. Snowdrops are small, but they're beautiful. There are white bells with little green tips. There are over 200 varieties of snowdrops in the world. In England, they have gardens that are devoted just to see snowdrops. And they have snowdrop societies. Now I put them in my garden and they bloom reliably about the first week in March. Occasionally we'll have snow on the ground, but even if we don't, they'll bloom like clockwork. They're very reliable. They don't spread and multiply that much. So if you want them scattered through your garden, you need to plant multiple groups of these bulbs. Here's a real close-up picture, and you can see those little tips of green. And then when they're done, they'll go to seed, and then the greenery will disappear and you won't know that they're there. And that's one of the beauties of bulbs, is that when they're finished doing their job, they go away and you don't know they're there until next year. Siberian squill, this is a new one that I'm planted. This is probably the second year. And they're very small, probably 4 to 5 inches tall. But again, it's a little bit of color, something different. Giant hyacinths, these are very temperature dependent. This year we had a good cold winter, so they loved it and they produced beautiful flowers. If we have a very mild winter, they'll come up and bloom, but the flower will be a fraction of this size. It'll look sort of spindly, like it wasn't very happy. Now, these are photos of giant hyacinths at the Dallas Arboretum. They have much more space, and so they have large plantings of these bulbs. But then when their season is done, they dig them up, toss them in the compost pile, and plant something else in that space. Well, I don't have that kind of money, and I don't have that kind of space. So what I plant is stuff that comes back every year. Amaryllis. Now, a lot of you will give or receive amaryllis at Christmas time. But once that plant is done blooming, you can plant it in the ground and it'll come back next year. And so you'll have some amaryllis in your garden. Ranunculus. This is one of the ugliest looking bulbs I've ever seen, but the result is a beautiful flower and it blooms beautifully. So it's something to consider adding to your garden. And as you note from the Latin name, it comes from Asia. Dutch iris. Now, these are a bit smaller than what we would consider traditional iris here in Dallas, but they're a beautiful flower. They come in a variety of colors, and they'll bloom about the middle of March. They'll bloom before the regular iris do. Here we are, sort of a pale blue iris, Dutch iris. As you can tell from the date, this is March 24th. And there's a rosemary in the background that blooms in the summer that's in this bed. Species tulips. Now, these are the only tulips that reliably come back every year and multiply. They're small bulbs. The flowers are quite small, probably size of my thumb, about 2 inches. But they come in a variety of colors. And I only planted, a couple of dozen, but now I have hundreds of these scattered in my garden. And every year they open up And they'll bloom depending on the weather. If it's a sort of mild spring, they'll bloom for maybe a week or so. And what they'll do is they'll open up during the day and then close up at night. And they come in yellow with red exterior. They also come with a white with a pink exterior. Here you have another photo of them. This is the white one. And again, what you're doing when you're planting these bulbs is not only are you providing color for you, you're providing sources of nectar for the insects and the bees. Spanish hyacinths, these are a miniature version, at least in presentation, to the giant hyacinth, except these Spanish hyacinths are about 3 to 4 inches tall for the flowers, the total flower. And you can see this one's just opening up. Here's a collection of them. These are white ones. And again, they'll spread a little bit. They're not very aggressive spreaders, but they do add a bit of color. And again, we're providing places for bees and all the different insects that live in our garden, a little bit of extra food. And then crinum. Crinum, this was a popular plant back in the 50s. And plants, they have their fashion trends just like clothes. So plants come in and out of fashion. Crinums are back in fashion. When they bloom, they usually have a circle of flowers, about 10 of them. And you can see a few of them that are open and a few of them that are closed. And they have bulbs that get bigger and bigger and bigger. But they need the right conditions to bloom. They need a bit of sun. They need well-drained soil. They get quite expensive now. You can spend $20, $30, $40 for a single bulb. But if you have an older garden or an older house, you may find these in your garden. Now we're going to talk about other things other than bulbs. We're going to talk about plants and seeds and tubers that you can plant for winter color and spring color. So we'll talk about pansies and snapdragons, lavender and dianthus, bluebonnets, spiderworts, iris, Asiatic lilies, Easter lilies, hostas, daylilies, elephant ears, and cannas. So for pansies, I like myself Johnny Jump Ups. And the reason I like the Johnny Jump Up is because it's a smaller flower. So if we have an ice storm or a heavy rain, they bounce back quicker and they hold up better to winter weather. And they will go to seed and occasionally they will come back. Snapdragons, they're mostly something you plant in the winter that'll bloom into early April. You can try and keep them going through the summer by watering them regularly, but they don't do as well. So really, these are pretty much an annual. Spanish lavender. Now, this is a plant that I killed several times by overwatering until I learned that you really don't want to water a lavender plant much at all, just to get it started. Now, I plant this up against my house where I don't water, and it blooms in the winter time. So you're talking probably February and March. They're beautiful flowers, and the bees love them. But this is the Spanish lavender. There's a French lavender, but it blooms in the summertime. Dianthus, these are great for pots and containers. They come in a variety of colors. And if you water them, they'll survive even our Texas summer. Bluebonnets, our state flower. Now, bluebonnets actually come in a variety of colors. There's a blue, there's a pink, and there's a maroon. Now, with bluebonnets, they're dependent on the rain now. If we have rain in August and September and early October, those seeds will germinate. However, if we have a really dry fall, you won't get very many bluebonnets next spring. And what they'll do is they will germinate probably in October, November, with 2 little leaves, and then they'll grow a little bit, and then they'll take off in February and then bloom in March. But again, it's very dependent on the weather. So if you don't get a lot of rain in September and October, you probably won't see very many bluebonnets next spring. Here's a pink one. Now in my garden, the bluebonnets always come back. The pink ones sometimes come back. And then the maroon hasn't come back in a long time. It was a very finicky one. It was developed by Texas A&M, but it did not come back. And I've not seen them in the nurseries like I used to when they first introduced those extra colors. Spiderwort. Now it's a funny plant. It has a root system that looks almost like an octopus. It's sort of stringy, but when you plant them, they will thrive just about anywhere in my garden. I put them in sun, I put them in shade. They bloom profusely and for months. Now, see, here's the roots. As you can see, it's kind of, sort of like an octopus. They come in different colors. There's a blue one, there's a lavender one, a pink one, and they are beautiful flowers. And I have some that bloom in March and continue blooming into June. Tall-bearded iris. Oh, they're incredible plants. Iris in general, there's about 75,000 named varieties. Iris are very tough and sturdy in North Texas. They thrive on neglect and lots of sunshine. They're very fragrant. Many of the older varieties are very fragrant, and you can fill your house with perfume when you have iris in your house. And a lot of these older ones have 3, 4, 5, even 6 blooms. And the plant is about 36 inches tall. Again, these are a wide variety of colors. And people have hybridized a number of different colors, combinations for iris. Now, this is one of my favorites that I got from a nursery out of Oregon, Bananas Foster. It has, well, 1, 2, 3. I think this one had 4 blooms on it. And they're large flowers. They're probably 6, 7 inches in height. And they've come back pretty much every year. This is one that's one of the newer varieties. This is a thornbird. As you can see, it has that little part that's sticking up. That's a bit unique. That's more of a space age iris. Now, if you want information on iris, there is an Iris Society in Dallas, and they have a flower show in late April. And they have plant sales in August and September each year. And then I've got Asiatic lilies. And these actually I got from Aldi's of all places. You don't expect to go buy plants at Aldi's, but occasionally they'll have bulbs in early, probably like April. You'll find them for about a week. And I bought these and they did beautifully in my yard, and they've come back every year. Easter lilies, I also got these at Aldi's, and they've come back reliably. This year they bloomed late because of the cold weather, and they ended up blooming in May instead of Easter. Daylilies. This is Stella d'Oro. This is a fairly new variety. Does beautifully. They don't multiply rapidly. They're pretty well behaved, but they do have a beautiful flower to them, and they bloom for about a week or 2. And here's some photos of daylilies from another garden. This isn't mine, but they are beautiful. And daylilies are like irises, that there are many, many varieties that people have created over the years. And there is a Daylily Society in Dallas. Hostas. Now, this is if you have a lot of shade, which I do nowadays. I didn't when I first bought my house, but now I have a lot of shade, and so I've had to go for shade-tolerant plants. And hostas do bloom. Here's the bloom from probably May. And these were new to the garden. I just put in some new raised beds, and I added these hostas and some ferns. Glads. I'd grown glads years ago, and I thought this year I'd try them again. They're beautiful, but I don't know how reliable they'll be as far as coming back. We're going to have to see. This is an experiment. And then elephant ears. And surprisingly, the elephant ears didn't mind the winter we had this year. They said, so what? And they came back beautifully. And this is a new raised bed I put in my front yard and added these elephant ears. Cannas, this is another experiment. This is first time I've tried it. And that's the thing with gardening. You can always experiment, add a new plant, take a plant out, see what will do best in your yard. So with bulbs and any type of gardening, you need information. You can go to the Dallas Public Library for gardening books. There are radio programs on the weekend. Neil Sperry does traditional gardening. Howard Garrett does organic gardening. The Dallas County Master Gardeners, they have a hotline that you can call for information, and they also have a speakers bureau. And then Half Price Books has a limited selection of gardening books. But it's always best to meet in person when you're talking about gardening, because you get a lot of information from people who've done it before. Groups that I think I would recommend would be the Dallas Council of Garden Clubs. And they are an umbrella group for 30 garden clubs in North Texas, in Dallas County and Ellis County. They meet at the Texas Discovery Gardens. They meet well, they're not the first Monday now, it's the first Thursday. They had to change it. But they meet at the Texas Discovery Gardens. They'll meet from November through May. If you live in Oak Cliff or you like parks, Friends of Oak Cliff Parks is a great source. There is the Iris Society of Dallas. There's the Oak Cliff Women's Club Garden Club. If you live in Oak Cliff or Point South, there's the Oak Cliff Garden Forum. Of course, the Rainbow Garden Club. I have a lot of information on our website, not only about gardening as far as books and information on plants and plant societies, but also if you're planning a trip. Texas Garden Clubs is the umbrella group for about 8,000 gardeners across Texas. And then the Texas Daffodil Society. They meet September, October, November, January, February, and April. So that's my program. Oh, bulbs. And where do I buy my bulbs? Usually I try for independent nurseries. What I found is that when I buy them at a big box store, that the bulbs tend to be sort of dried out because they buy them too early and bring them in too early. You really don't want to buy your bulbs until October or November. So that is it. Questions?
We did have a question.
Sure.
Any bulbs that can grow and thrive in shade?
Depends. Do you get any sunshine at all? Do your leaves fall off in the wintertime? If it's under live oak, it probably would not bloom if it doesn't get some sun at some point in the year. Because really they're dependent on sunshine in the winter. So from the time they bloom or from the time they come up, I mean, you could plant them, but if it doesn't get any sunshine at all, they're probably not going to do too well. But at some point they have to have some sun.
Okay. Another question, I'm not sure exactly what this is referring to. Narcissus, the white ones, also called paper whites.
Right. They are.
Okay.
And see, they're sort of all related. They're just a variety of daffodil. Okay.
few people are asking if you could share your PowerPoint with us to send out. I don't know if that's something you want to share or not, but
Not really, because it changes, and I always make changes to it. It's not the same thing, but you could always ask me to come speak to your garden group. And much of this stuff is stuff you can find online, but no, I'd prefer not to share it. Because I
okay.
mean, it's going to be on the YouTube anyway.
Right. I understand. Someone says I had purple irises behind my back fence. We transplanted some. Most of them bloomed white. Periodically, one or two bloom purple. Is there any explanation for this?
Well, plants can't read, for one thing. But it could be, it's maybe reverting back to an older variety. Maybe it was a hybrid at some point. But, or it may have been that when you separated them, that maybe some of them were white, but they got crowded and so they weren't blooming. You see, with irises, you have to separate them about every 3 to 5 years because they grow. Their roots, their tubers grow and grow and grow and grow. And if they get too crowded, they'll stop blooming. So when you're separating them out, you may have separated something that was white, but that had stopped blooming.
Hmm. Well, that makes sense. How to divide a hosta. I'm not sure how you pronounce that.
Hosta. Well, I've never divided a hosta yet because this is my first year, so that's something new for me. But again, when you're working with these plants and separating them, you have to wait until after they finish blooming and they go dormant. Then you can move them. And sometimes when you're moving an iris or any other plant, it may take it a year to settle down and get settled before it'll bloom again. So, it
Okay.
just, and a lot of these, what you'll find, the white ones, they'll sometimes will bloom much earlier. They call them cemetery iris, because these are the irises that people found in cemeteries that have been planted there and then neglected.
That's interesting.
Well, yeah, and I mean, there's people that what they call them bulb hunters, and they look for abandoned houses and old cemeteries to find plants that survived neglect. And I planted some bulbs for one of the libraries years ago, and then left them and didn't do anything to them. And there's some of the best irises I have any connection with because they're not touched. They're not, all they do is get water and lots of sunshine and they thrive.
Wow. That's cool.
Well, irises, it's a good time to plant them right now. Crocuses, you don't have to put them in the refrigerator. The only thing you have to put in the refrigerator are large tulips. And you have to be careful what you put in your refrigerator, because if you've got like apples in your refrigerator, the gas that they give off will kill those tulips.
Okay. Say a question I think that got missed. What months do you buy the fall bulbs again? Someone was wanting to.
October, November, December.
Okay. I have a hosta in a large pot that I keep outside. It has come back beautifully every year except this year. It looks rather sickly. Is there something I should do to help it thrive again?
Probably need to get it a bigger pot, because it may have, see, if it's in a pot and it's self-contained, it may just have run out of space to grow. So you need to probably get a larger pot and transfer it. And one thing you have to worry about with hostas are snails and slugs. And what you do with slugs is you get a little, there's two things you can do. Well, actually, it's three. One, you can get a little container, a little like a jar lid, and plant it in the ground near the hosta and pour some cheap beer in it. And the slugs will go after the beer and drown. Or you can get eggshells, crush them up, and scatter them around your hosta because the slugs don't like uneven surfaces. And it sort of cuts them so they stay away from it. Or you can get slug bait. The only problem with slug bait is every time it rains, it's gone. So I prefer eggshells and cheap beer. And I don't think the slugs care what brand of beer it is. It's just, so it doesn't matter what beer it is, as long, you know, if you're going to do it for your garden, you want to make it sure that you don't spend a lot of money on it, because after all, it's the slugs who are drinking it.
Yes, that's true. What's the quickest way to plant tiny bulbs like grape hyacinths? However you pronounce that.
Well, you need to read the instructions on the package you get them from. It'll tell you to dig down so far, and usually it's several inches. Make sure that you've got the pointy end sticking up, because that's the point where the flower will come out of. Cover it up, and if it's not going to rain anytime soon, go ahead and water it lightly. You don't want to get it too wet. And we're fortunate in that it's going to rain later this week. So if you've got stuff planted, say today or tomorrow, it'll get rainfall. And, you know, no matter how much city water I put on my bulbs and flowers, they always do best when they get rainfall. It has special chemicals in that rainfall that really perks up my plants. Okay.
All right. I don't see any other questions in the chat right now.
Okay.
So if you have any more questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or if you'd like to ask them out loud, we can unmute you.
Well, and the thing is, if you are interested in a particular type of plant, you can go online. There are a number of plant societies covering different plants. I just mentioned the daffodil group and the iris group because I'm in them, but there are other groups. There's a group for cactus. There's a group for azaleas. There's a group for hibiscus. So pretty much any plant that has a lot of people that are growing it, there's going to be a group that have an organization that will provide you information on that particular type of plant. And if you're free during the day and you're not working during the day, try and join one of your local garden clubs, because they are a font of wisdom, because they've done it before. They've made those mistakes, and it'll help you make fewer mistakes. And finally, check out our local public gardens, because they'll show you those plants in being planted, and you can see how they look in a garden and see if that's right for you. They're great for getting ideas for your own garden. And of course, talk to your local nursery, independent nursery, because they'll usually have a master gardener on staff who can help you figure out what's going to work best for you, because each garden is different. Your individual microclimate determines what'll work best for you. And when you're thinking about gardening, you need to think about sunlight. Where does the sun show up in my yard? How is my house oriented? And what kind of soil do I have? Because most of us have clay soil, which has two states. It's either really hard as a rock, or it's kind of mushy. And to help your plants grow, you want to sort of loosen up that soil so it'll retain the moisture, and that the roots will be able to get through there. So again, any local garden club would have a font of information, because those people have been doing it a long time, and they can help you avoid making some of the mistakes that they made or I made. Because to get a garden to work, a lot of plants have to die because it's always a trial and error effort. Okay.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions right now,
Oh,
but
for clay soil, a couple of things you do. With clay soil, I add things like compost. I also things like expanded shale. Expanded shale is rock that's been heated up to a high temperature, and then it sort of pops open and it retains moisture in your soil. But so expanded shale, compost, even putting leaves that you rake up in your yard, never throw away your leaves. Use them in your flower beds because they'll decompose naturally and it'll help loosen up your soil. I saw another question, something about some trees.
I had 2 small trees that died during the winter in my front flower bed. What shrubs would be ideal to plant now under my front window, shaded by my neighbor's large tree?
Well, the question there is how tall, how much difference between your bed and your window? You don't want it to block your window, probably. How much sunlight does it get? And maybe you don't want a shrub, maybe you want a small tree. You might do, but it also depends what killed the tree. Because sometimes plants will die overnight because there's something in the soil. It's especially prevalent north of Dallas, north and south of the city. A lot of the fields where their houses now used to be cotton fields, and there's a fungus called cotton root rot that will kill not only, it'll kill a lot of plants, pear trees, some roses, and it's a soil-borne fungus, and there's nothing you can do. You just have to plant something that's not affected by it. But depending on the amount of space you have and how much sunlight you get, you might consider something like a Japanese maple or a weeping tree, a tree that doesn't go up, but that goes down. I have a small red bud, and it's a weeping red bud. So it's only a couple of feet high. And then when it grows, it goes down instead of up. Now, I've never tried camellias, but I would see if there's a camellia society that could help you. Let's see what else. I know that they have camellias at the Arboretum near the DeGolyer Mansion. They have a whole bed of them. And I know other people that have them.
Okay. We're almost out of time. So if there's any other questions, we have a few minutes left for questions. Just want to take a few minutes. I did post the link to our next program. Next Monday, we'll have the Dallas Arboretum. We'll be talking about some of the things that they're planting, and so that should be interesting. I also posted the link to our seed library at the Dallas Public Library. So if you're interested in getting some free seeds, you can check out our seed library. We do have several satellite branches now, not just at the central library, so we can direct you to those locations. October 11th is a holiday, so there will not be a Grow With Us program on that day. Just letting you know now for those of you who are regulars to our Grow With Us programs. I guess if there's no other questions, we want to thank Stan. We have some great information that was presented, and thank you for joining us today. And thank you all for joining us. And I guess we'll call it a program if there's nothing else. Anything else you want to add, Judy? Do you have anything to add, or Stan?
I think Judy had to step away for just a minute.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great week. We look forward to the next week's Grow With Us program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Dan.